Welcome to our concluding session for today. Let me introduce the panel. I won't take them in any particular order down the road, but Chris Colvin has over 20 years' experience in the intellectual property field and is the founding partner of a leading full-service intellectual property law firm, Colvin Hudnell. He has successfully handled numerous IP cases and various other matters resulting in victories or favorable settlements, and his cases have been featured in the American Lawyer, the Wall Street Journal, IP 360, and other leading publications. Chris is also an experienced entrepreneur, having launched several successful companies, including the first and largest private social media network for in-house attorneys, law partners, and Ivy League alum. He is a graduate of Princeton University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering, a law degree from George Washington University, and he worked for several years as an engineer for IBM, where he designed the key components of the U.S. air traffic control system. I don't know whether or not we should thank him or not.
He's died in the last couple of years.
Chris is a resident of Ditmas Park, Brooklyn, where he lives and frequently repairs a 100-year-old Victorian house with his wife, 8-year-old twins, and his Italian water dog. I might be more impressed if it were an Italian wine dog, but I'll go with the
She does
Italian.
try to drink our wine.
Aryeh Friedman is the Chief Privacy Officer and Assistant General Counsel at Dun & Bradstreet. Prior to joining Dun & Bradstreet, he was the Chief Privacy Officer, Vice President, and Assistant General Counsel at Pfizer. He was also Chief Counsel of Competition at Wyeth before it was acquired by Pfizer, and held similar positions at British Telecom and AT&T. Before going in-house, he practiced at Paul Weiss and at Drinker Biddle. Aryeh is also an adjunct faculty at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the author of the book Law and High Technology Innovation, and the editor of the ABA's Consumer Protection Law Development Updates, both 2011 and 2013, and is the vice chair of both the Privacy and Information Security Committee of the Antitrust Section of the American Bar Association and the Compliance and Ethics Committee of the Association of Corporate Counsel. He is a graduate of New York University School of Law and Cornell University, and also studied at the London School of Economics. Q Mangus manages product marketing for archiving, security, and business continuity solutions offered by GWAVA. He has over 6 years of experience in software solutions, marketing, and received ITIL version 3 Foundation Certificate in 2010. He graduated from Utah Valley University, located in Orem, Utah, with a bachelor's degree in business management, and currently resides in Provo, Utah, with his wife Brittany and 2 children. Daniel Garrie is the national partner at Law and Forensics LLC and is responsible for the cybersecurity, e-discovery, and digital forensic global practice. He also is general counsel to Pulse Advisory, a venture development firm out of New York City. Mr. Garrie sits on the board of and advises several startups, including Safety, SearchApp.com, Legal Tech, and Bank Solar. Over the years, he's advised many, many more. He has built and sold several internet security, e-commerce, and search technology startups. And prior to his time at Pulse Advisory, he was the worldwide director of electronic discovery and information governance at Charles River Associates. He also works as a strategic partner for Quorum Ventures and a Board of Governors members for the Organization of Legal Professionals. He is a nationally recognized educator and lecturer on various topics including computer software, cybersecurity, e-discovery, forensics, emerging internet and mobile technologies, and cyber warfare. He is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Law and Cyber Warfare, a fellow at the Poneman Information Institute, Privacy Information, and a distinguished neutral with CPR. He is also on the editorial board of the Beijing Law Review. Mr. Garrie recently spoke to the Hill on a congressional caucus hearing on the topic of cyber warfare in Washington, D.C., and frequently works with companies all over the world on complex cyber warfare and security issues. And if you don't listen to him today, you can be sure that he is listening to you. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you for those introductions. That was pretty comprehensive. I was waiting for my Social Security number to be in there. My blood type, I didn't hear that. Anyhow, Once again, my name is Q Mangus. I'm going to moderate this panel. I have a few things that I will say, but I'll actually leave it up to the experts here. Just so you know, a couple things to take note of. The presenters here, our panel members, are speaking on behalf of themselves and not representing their companies in the discussion we're going to have. And another thing to take note of is don't quote us on what we're saying here. Try and keep it in the room, Chatham room rules. So we'll go ahead and get started. Some things to take note of as well is we are going to have some key takeaways. What we really want to touch on is mobile. We're going to be talking a lot about mobile and mobile usage, mobile policies, and then also we're going to touch on social media and what it can mean for litigation. So we'll go ahead and get started. What we're going to do is I have a set of questions for the panel, and that's how we'll go about this, and it will be more of a discussion format. So there are slides. We won't really be using the slides. You do have them, though, for reference. We're going to have this more of a discussion. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to start off by talking about what I just said with social media. Should organizations allow or not allow social media and BYOD, or bring your own device, mobile device?
Before we answer the question, I'm just interested, who here doesn't have a BYOD policy within their organization today? Or bring your own device? Some people ask me what BYOD
Does not, right?
Does not.
Does not, yeah. Okay.
Right,
no,
so we got
that's
unanimity here. Right, we're off to a good start.
That's good. So should you, okay, and then how do we mitigate risks? And finally, along those same lines, how do we find a balance between policy and technology when we're talking about social media and BYOD?
I think I might start by saying, are you aware of BYODs or have a policy? I mean, at this point, it's reality, whether you have a policy or not. I go to meetings, somebody whips out their iPad immediately to start doing work on that, and often it's their own iPad or a joint iPad that they got. So I think you're facing the reality whether you're aware of it or not. So the only question is whether you have the right controls in place. And controls are a series of controls. It's not a single control, so it's nice to have a policy. Some companies have agreements with the employees so it's more enforceable than that. Some companies will limit BYODs to certain employees and certain data and not others. So it is not a single control. It has to be a set of controls. It has to be a control that is, on the one hand, technologically neutral, but on the other hand, something that keeps up to date with technology. So you certainly should be updating whatever controls you have in place on at least an annual basis.
Perfect.
And to add to that, I think one thing most organizations often forget is, besides the mobile device is probably the easiest point of attack for any organization today. Before we even touch on that, I think the bigger question is, if an employee leaves and you're letting them use the device, say you have Office 365 or Google Apps or some cloud-based service, and you're running an iPad.
Salesforce.
Or whatever. I pick some hypothetical WYSIWYG, whatever, however you're doing it, and they use their own iPad, and they download your customer list, and they download your pipeline for the next 2 quarters, and they download your sales strategy, and then they walk into your manager's office and they say, hey, I just got a pay raise for 20%, you guys aren't willing to match, economy's better, peace, goodbye. They walk out the door with their own iPad. If your policy doesn't actually entitle you to look at that iPad, how are you going to do it? They own it, it's their device. If you didn't have them sign anything, and then let's say you did have them sign anything, what's the incentive? What's the carrot? And you could seek the TRO. You can always, I'm sure Chris is happy. He's a phenomenal lawyer. I'm sure he's happy to help you enforce the TRO. But even the TRO, right, I mean, by that point, you go through those steps. But you have to ask yourself, what's the carrot versus the stick? What's the cost? Because it happens all the time, and it's only going to happen more and more. And I think you had some interesting ways that you guys are looking at solving that.
Isn't that a problem even before the iPad? You could have emailed yourself that list and you're in the same spot, right?
So email filtering and tracking is a lot more robust and rich. So you can, let's say you're in Big Four accounting firm, not picking on them here, okay, but or anywhere, right? Just any company, you can actually block emails from going out that have customer names, that have social security numbers in them, and stop them, encrypt them, track them. There are a multitude of tools that large organizations, maybe not most law firms are using, but I know a lot of large organizations are tracking email traffic. Especially, I mean...
Yeah. Except that it has to be country sensitive.
Yes.
And the problem with data is it goes all over. And certain countries you can't use that kind of tracking device, and then employees can't even consent to the use of that. So
expressly consent, right? I mean, even if they say it's okay, it's still not okay. So.
The only thing I'd add to the comments, which I agree with, is we're all lawyers, or most of us are, and we like policies, we like rules. But corporate behavior is such that it's important to instill in the corporate culture an actual understanding of what people should and should not be doing with these mobile devices. I think if you're like most people, maybe lawyers actually read these things, most people get this packet when they join the company and they have to sign something saying they read it, but I think a lot of it's kind of like the click-through agreements online. Most people, I don't think, ever read the policy. So it's good to have a program in place to actually teach new employees when they are hired what they should be doing with these devices and what they should not be doing, and then perhaps annually reminders of the kind of conduct that should be going on. So it's better if it's live or at least video than just sort of handing someone a policy. By the way, we do have some handouts out front that I don't think are necessarily on your thumb drive. So if maybe a volunteer could grab it and start the process of passing.
And one way to address that issue, right, is if the employee does leave, you can, and they are in sales, you can look at what outbound emails went in and out, and most people want to get their last paycheck. And you can make part of the employee policy that before you release the funds, they agree to give you the mobile device for inspection. We have done that, and we see it happen, and it's happening certainly more and more. The important part is for your culture and the way your company operates to think what is appropriate, right? What makes common sense for the way you work, and both geographical and cultural and a multitude of things, but it's certainly something you should be thinking about and be aware of, because it does happen, and it happens quite a bit.
And I know at some point Daniel has some great horror stories where he has to change the names to protect the innocent. But at some point today he'll share some of them, I hope.
I mean, mobile devices, I believe, are one of the biggest problems facing organizations today for bring your own device, because it's very hard to secure them. And people, you know, with an Android or with an iPhone, and we're constantly involved in cleaning these things up, where people download an app, the app is compromised, the app then compromises their network. And data leaves their network, and they're like, oh, how'd that happen? Well, maybe it's because you let anybody with their own mobile phone walk in and you don't lock down your wireless network or your data. Some people let their grandchildren use their iPad to play and multiplayer games. And believe it or not, a large number of the multiplayer game servers sit in China, Russia, and other countries outside the United States. And they'll put malware on your iPad, and the iPad will it'll jump to your organization. I mean, I would say that if you haven't been hacked or compromised, you will be in the next 24 months, easily, through your mobile device.
Another thing that Daniel frequently talks about is, and I'd love to hear a couple of these stories, which is there's actually large companies essentially paying hush money to hackers to not talk about the breaches that they've instigated at major corporations, and to unlock data which they've effectively locked up or done other malicious activity, which, you know, you tend to think hackers are in it for fun or whatever. At least that's the sort of Hollywood view. But really, mostly it's
about money. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure people here, you know, we'll just move this all to hypothetical, so we'll make everybody's conversation a little easier here. Hypothetically, I mean, there are things like ransomware, where people will get an email or they'll download an app or whatever, and they'll encrypt their entire hard drive. And they will literally receive an email saying you need to wire $1,000 cash to decrypt your hard drive. And they'll wire them $1,000 to decrypt that hard drive, because they don't have access to that data. And we have other clients that are in the accounting space that have had their phone system stolen, because most people run VoIP phones, and someone brought in a mobile device, and the mobile device, they were using an app for free talking, and it was compromised, and they use that to take control of their voice system, and they hypothetically lock them out of their system. So when you called their corporate lines, it directed you to an adult phone service. And it's probably not the best business, especially for accounting firms, to, I'd like to check on my taxes today. Oh, one night. But I mean, the point being is that they rapidly wired the $100,000 it was required to unlock their phone system, because you can't afford not to have it. And then they reported it to the authorities, and they worked those issues out. But I mean, it's just important to be aware that it is happening.
And it's happening quite a bit. Larry Poneman in June 2013, Larry does a lot of studies, and they did a study in 2013 about the risk of regulated data. And regulated data is sensitive data, identity theft data, which includes account numbers, passwords and PIN, employment records, authentication data, social security numbers, payroll and benefits. 54% of respondents have had, on an average, 5 data breach incidents involving the loss or theft of a mobile device containing regulated data. So that was his statistic. So this is not an uncommon experience. Right.
And then another thing in your BYOD policies, do you require your employees to encrypt their phones? I mean, you can, if you want to bring your own device and use it, you can require them to encrypt that device, or encrypt the device, or you might already have a mobile device management solution that your organization's deploying, which makes things a little easier sometimes.
And also, what we're doing about that is making sure your employees download patches and have the most recent version of software on their mobile phones. And I know a lot of employees' iPhone, and I have an iPhone too, had a recent update with patches on it. The problem is people didn't like, or at least a lot of people didn't like the update, and so wouldn't download the update, even though there are critical patches there that are needed. They weren't concerned about the patches; they were more concerned about the cosmetics of the update.
Well, some people argue that they lost their data, but the function of the patch was to actually, some of the things they were patching were fairly large security holes in the iOS 7.1. So you're 100% right. But I think the other question, Chris, from just thinking about it from a legal perspective, since you see a lot of litigation, is how are people managing that risk for bringing their mobile device in litigation holds? What happens if an employee quits midway through and they're using their own mobile device? I mean, how is that being handled?
Well, I think that's a big topic. I think the most important thing, though, is for the legal department, if there is a legal department, or if it's a very small company, sometimes outside counsel, to very quickly identify sort of the group of people that are potentially involved in the litigation issues, and immediately sit with them, preferably in person or by phone, not just sending in sort of a CYA email, although you need to do that as well, and make sure they understand the gravity of the situation and that they need to stop deleting data at the point that the decision to litigate is made, or at the point that the company has been sued. So that's obviously a very important issue. I always focus on the practical, because I think companies do a decent job on the sort of checking the box stuff. They send out the litigation hold memo. They probably do a reasonable job identifying the people that need to receive it. What I find is that what companies struggle with is actually making that have a practical impact on the way people conduct themselves. Here's an example that, if I can go way back to the days when, when I first started practicing, it was paper discovery, and email was just sort of starting to happen, and litigation lags a few years behind the real world in terms of the types of documents that are at issue. And I remember when the first few years when we started doing the big email discovery, it was unbelievable the things that you would find people saying in emails. And I think there was this sense back then of, you send an email, it kind of disappears into the ether and nobody ever sees it again. So it was always the most fun to look through the emails in the early days till they got to be millions of them, and then it wasn't so much fun anymore. But there was a shift in mindset that the executives needed, and we did one thing in a case which was kind of fun. It was half in jest, but it was a good mnemonic. We actually gave each of the executives one of those little exhibit stickers, like a trial exhibit sticker, and we said, put this on the top of your computer screen, kind of near the send button, and think about the fact that what you were saying in any of your corporate communications could easily be, Exhibit A in a future litigation. And now I think we need a similar mental adjustment to social media, texting. Another little war story, which in this case was a good one. When SMS first started happening, or at least I first became aware of it, this was a case that was in 2004. A CEO left our client's business and stole the technology, stole the customers, and set up shop, literally across the street. And the corporate owner was a European company. And we looked at the emails; they were perfectly clean. We had a really hard time sort of pinning on him, even though we knew what he did. Because it was a technology company, they were somehow able to get the SMS messages that the sort of group that had stolen the data and the customers, and they were a gold mine. So this was my first texting experience in 2004, and the case settled very, very quickly, and they shut down this new company very quickly before we even needed to have a pretrial conference. So, that was an early lesson in texting, but I think now some of your best stuff, if you're on the other side, is going to come from text, it's going to come from social media posts. So one piece of advice I have is to switch all your systems to Snapchat immediately. So if you know what that is, you'll get that. I'm joking.
And just returning back to the BYOD while you were talking, made me think, who here in this room requires, if people have BYOD, that they have some sort of antivirus software on their phone? How many people know that any of their employees that are bringing their own mobile devices have antivirus software on their phones? Well, that might be like a big takeaway today, to go consider amending your policy to have that, because the antivirus programs do exist, and they exist for a very important reason, both for the iPhone as well as the Android, and it's $5, or if you're a larger organization, you can push it out. But I think even those smaller steps might prove to be fairly useful and effective in helping secure and manage your organization.
Maybe on that point, I'll put Aryeh on the spot. If you can answer this, I'm curious. Is there ever a time when it makes sense for a larger company to take over that function, essentially, if you can, of updating the smartphones for your employees? Or is that a good idea, a bad idea, or impossible?
Different companies have different takeaways on it. For companies that think that BYOD is a great way to save money, which it is, by the way, is not. But to the extent that they think so, they don't want the maintenance responsibilities. They'll give a stipend. And there are lots of problems with that. One is you don't have control over the updates. You also, if the phone is sent in for repair, it's not going to be sent to you. It will be sent to some third party who will then be able to access, if you give the password, they'll be able to access the material on there. So I think overall companies probably want to support the software, even though it's a combined personal and business. Having the company support has its own issues, because people are very sensitive about the personal side of what's on that phone. So you have to kind of work out what's going to work best for your employees. It's not good choices either way, but if you're going to allow this policy, you need to consider it. Because third parties have access to that, to me that's the greatest concern. Encryption of the phone, making sure that it's encrypted, is very important. Even having a lock when it's not in use. A lot of phones don't even have that, or it's not set. There's also what's called jailbreaking. That's more of when we have problems with IT team. IT teams love to play with their cell phones. And they do all kinds of things which are never good for the company. I mean, they circumvent systems. Whatever they do, they think it's a lot of fun, but it puts our data at risk. And so you want to have a policy that makes it very clear that if it's a BYOD, they can buy their own device to play with whatever they want to play with. But when it's a BYOD device, that can't be done. So you need some really clear rules if you're going to do that. I would say you should do a risk assessment. Before you, certain employees shouldn't have. Risk assessment typically says the chief executives probably shouldn't have, because they have no sense of information. My own view is IT guys shouldn't have it, because they do things with their computers or cell phones that are always dangerous. But whatever it is, you should have some risk assessment in terms of personnel, In terms of devices you'll approve, some devices you probably should not allow to be used for BYOD. Certain devices are more secure, there's more screening, you ought to use that. And certain information that just should never be put on a device. And it's both your proprietary data, but then a lot of emails have proprietary data of your business attachments, and they'll have your business customers, or you have NDAs, and their information is going to be on that email or on that attachment to the email. And if somebody loses their device, so it's just negligence, loses that device and they didn't lock it and it's not encrypted, you've got some serious problems.
Is that realistic? Aryeh, I'm interested in your comment that certain things should never be on a mobile device.
Sure.
But it seems like those are so ubiquitous. I mean, we're all carrying these supercomputers around in our pockets. And people use it for everything, right?
We call it consequence management.
Right.
If you have a policy, you have to have consequence management. And that is that if they violate the policy, it can't be just an admonition. It may have to be more, up to and including termination of employment. That's the only enforceable way to make sure that people are following and to reinforce that rule. So January 28th is International Privacy Day, a great day to do some teaching on privacy or on data security. We use that to bring home critical lessons, one of which is maintain security of data.
And I think it goes at all levels. I think from a privacy perspective, I'm always amazed at the senior executives because they want to have private email. They'll use their Gmail address on their mobile device because most very senior executives have admin that usually have access to your email account. So they'll be using their Gmail, and it'll become ubiquitous, and it can present a whole lot of problems, both at the executive level all the way down to working just new hires, the people that join, or IT guys that come and jailbreak their phone and think, oh, this is cool. You're like, you shouldn't have done that. So,
and if you're a plaintiff, the first thing you want to get are those unofficial emails.
Right, and the first thing you do is you issue the litigation hold not to the company but to Google or Yahoo, and you say, please, and please preserve all emails relating to this email account. And there's also SEC repercussions as well, right? If you're conducting a large amount of your corporate business or using social media more like Twitter to have private chats, but they're not as private as you thought they were or something.
And if you want to be completely scared, we also have export controls. And export controls can apply to your mobile device in a couple of ways. One is a level of encryption you have on it, but another one is simply you have data on your mobile phone that you don't know that you have. It's a scientific, it falls within the categories that require a license. You take your mobile phone or your iPad, more than a mobile phone, you take it over to a country where it's licensing requirements, and you haven't gotten the license, you have exported that data to a country without a license, and that is a violation of the export laws.
That's criminal.
And that's criminal.
That's jail time.
So you need, and there actually have been there's a prosecution of somebody who brought his computer, so it's a computer, but brought it into China. He had been given 15 minutes training on export controls. But the government felt that was sufficient to bring him for knowingly bringing in information into China without having the appropriate export license. And they brought a criminal prosecution against him. So that's another reason why you need to be careful about the data that's on the mobile device, especially if it's corporate data. That's what very few of us have scientific data on our personal devices that will require export licenses. It is more likely on the business device. Are there questions, by the way, in the audience that we're covering a lot of topics, but feel free to raise your hands if...
Yes, absolutely, yeah. We've actually, it's interesting because we've covered most of these questions just by talking, so this is good. I like it.
I had a question for the audience. Just hypothetically speaking here, a lot of people have data breach or security prevention policies. Do people here actually have data response or breach policies for if a phone is lost? Do you have a protocol for handling and assessing that risk if a senior executive's mobile device that is using Salesforce apps that are on there? Is there some sort of internal protocol besides call a PR firm or whatever maybe the general? I mean, I'm just wondering have people given that some thought or... because that's another conversation you might want to consider engaging just from a business perspective, right? Everybody invests a lot in prevention and controlling the mobile device, but one thing people often never consider is what do we do if it does happen? I mean, do you know what your insurance policy says? Do you know who we should be talking to? Do you know a litany of things that at the time, as they say, it's very expensive to get help the day of. So the more legwork you can do up front, and to understand that and have that response, the more you probably won't feel any better, but it also won't cost as much. Is how you should look at it. So just another idea for thought.
One other thing in terms of the scope of the risks. When I go to meetings, often people will whiteboard ideas, often highly technical ideas, highly proprietary ideas. I've noticed people don't take notes anymore. What they do is they use the camera. They take their cell phone out, either personal, and they take a picture. That can, if your cell phone is lost or if a pocket camera is lost, that's probably the most sensitive data. That's your future corporate plans. And because people took a picture and then emailed it, so the picture now is in other people's cell phones, and then you want to take it home, so you put it on your personal phone. I mean, that's how easily data is transmitted in different ways.
And that goes beyond security concerns, because many of those corporate strategies or technical secrets, they could easily qualify as trade secrets, but they could lose that status if they're widely distributed. So by that simple act of taking that picture and sending it to someone without any controls, you could actually be giving away or destroying very valuable corporate trade secrets. So there's very serious IP legal implications to some of this conduct, in addition to just the general security aspects.
And of course, depending on what sector you operate in, I mean, there are additional repercussions depending where you're based out of, right? I mean, the NIST standards were passed, the OCC, I don't know who here is in banking or not, but the NIST 800 series was just adopted informally by the OCC. You know how they say, we suggest you follow this policy or a similar such policy in like kindness or fashion. But in it, there's a whole extensive thing around the mobile security piece that the government, the OCC is adopting, which I assume eventually will trickle down all the way eventually to the law firms, which is absolutely awesome for any of the third-party consulting companies that will help you get there. But it's also something to think about when a large banking institution might, today, hypothetically, they might walk around and see how you manage documents. I certainly would see in the future they're going to ask to see how you manage mobile devices and how you manage the BYOD situation in the near future, I would see.
So I'm listening to all of this, and I'm trying in my mind to separate the practical from the theoretical. Right? As a practical matter, you're really never going to be able to stop a rogue employee from stealing data that they have legitimate access to, because they can do it in 100 different ways, and they don't have to email it to themselves. So that's a theoretical risk that's very hard to mitigate against. Your example with taking a picture with the camera, well, that assumes that somebody finds the phone who actually would open that up and know what to do with it. From a practical standpoint, what would you say the greatest risks are of BYOD and the best ways to protect against those?
Okay. For me, the most realistic nightmare in terms of BYOD is sales. The salesperson with all the contacts, and maybe the salesperson having PCI data on their thing because they're taking credit cards, and they'll take a quick picture of the credit card number rather than writing it down. It's amazing to me how lazy people are. They don't want to write, they'll just take a picture of the credit card. I think salespeople are not in the office. Salespeople are on the road. They'll walk around with their camera. I think that is one of the highest risk areas, and for that you need to have very clear policies and procedures in place. You need really good education of the sales folks to try and do that. There is a thing called the mobile device management software. So there's software out there as a control that segregates data, allows a company to remotely wipe on the business side of the data at least, and not the other side. Technical solutions, I think is a combination of those solutions that are there, but that I suppose is in terms of the most likely risk, is a salesperson purposely leaving the company and taking the data.
And I would say that for sure, I think the most common scenario we see is just drunk executive forgetting their phone. You'd be shocked the number of people that go out and have a really good night, and then it's Friday night, and then Monday morning they're like, oh crap, where did I leave my iPhone or my iPad or usually iPad. If it's their iPhone, they'll figure it out by the morning when they wake up hungover and their wife or whoever or husband or whatever the situation is. But I mean, you'd be shocked, and I think the situation there is depending on the size of your company. Because to be very frank with you, everybody in this room is in the business of making money, hopefully, with their company, and to mitigate and manage these risks, it's a balancing act. But I think that if it's a real chance that you have executives that wine and dine and they're going to lose their phones, that you want to at least have a policy that lets you remotely wipe them, or a mobile device management solution on there that lets you clean up that data. Because even if the data is not stolen, because let's say nobody really cares so much about that data, right? You probably don't want to get a fine because let's say you're an accounting firm and it's tax season and you have a bunch of emails that have a bunch of attachments on it that have people's whatever data that will result in a violation of the PCI or Massachusetts data privacy law and ensuing, right? The plaintiff's bar, if the plaintiff's lawyers in here, I'm not casting aspersions here, but I mean, the opportunities are amiss, and I think that's one of the biggest problems. I mean, and then you got the sales employees, and I mean that you know it's controlling, it's balancing cost risk ratios really.
Right, and I think. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to add to those comments that it's often not a rogue employee, although that is a problem. Particularly, we have the workplace is more mobile than ever. Literally mobile. People working outside the office, but also moving company to company. Salespeople move all the time. So sometimes it is a rogue employee, but at least as often it's negligence, it's laziness. Another danger point in addition to sales that I'll note, because I've seen it so much in my practice over the years, engineers, scientists, they're very smart people. They really care about what they do, but they love to share with their colleagues. They don't really respect corporate borders all the time. And when they have a new innovation, they love to share it. So I could easily see that whiteboard scenario of a new design of a chip, being photographed and sent to a colleague at another company or an outside technical consultant. So it's important to educate those people that hold those valuable IP and the trade secrets of the company. Customer lists are a huge problem and hugely valuable to most companies. So you want to lock those up tight and make sure people don't inadvertently share that information.
And today in most large organizations or medium-sized, you can monitor most things that are going outbound over the internet, right? It's the bigger problem is the people that are truly, as you pointed out, if there's a will, there's a way, right? I mean, it's often hard, and most people don't lock down the USB device ports, or they let people bring in SIM cards to put them in their phone. So even if you lock down the MDM, they'll forget to lock down the ability to write to external USB, memory device. So I mean, it's really about figuring out what's appropriate for your organization. But the important thing to remember is that without getting the written consent, and say your wife is using the mobile phone, or it's it's a lot more difficult if you don't actually get the employees by or explicit written consent to do whatever you're seeking to do.
And I'm going to put in a plug right now for GWAVA. We do have a solution that actually monitors and archives mobile communications. So that is something that you could look into, whether it's us or somebody else out there. There is options out there to be able to actually monitor what's going on. And we're talking about MDM, but also actual communications as well.
And that's a
have
good
to be
point.
the NSA.
It's a good point that the monitoring, and I see this from a litigation perspective, but it's also just from a corporate data management standpoint. I think a similar point needs to be made, which is basically impossible to monitor this stuff manually at this point. You just can't do it. I remember when e-discovery first started happening, we were still trying to print the stuff out and review it, and it got ridiculous, and we realized we can't do it that way anymore. I think the same thing is true in this sort of data privacy, data security. You need some automated tools to help. If you're any sizable organization, the policy alone is not enough, the education alone is not enough. You need some kind of monitoring system in place that's
Technology
With one caveat, and that has to be that monitoring is permitted by local law. And you need to be careful about that because certain jurisdictions will not allow that monitoring.
Absolutely.
I would also say it's not just drunk people, it's the back of an airplane. The airplane pocket
Yeah.
is one of the most dangerous places because people put
iPad.
their iPad in there and fall asleep and get off the plane and then realize afterwards. That plus weak passwords. 1212, number one favorite password.
I know, it's crazy. And even today, people still do it. Or 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm going to switch to 4, 3, 2, 1 right now.
1, 2, 3, 4.
It would be great if we could get to the survey
Yes.
a little bit, and that's one of the materials that went around. And Daniel initiated this survey, and you know, we helped as well. We surveyed members of In the House, which is a large network for in-house counsel, and got some amazing information.
Yeah,
So I advise you to read it. But I guess the things that the real big take-home lesson to me was there really are shockingly few controls, standards, and practices, and that's at every level, at the governmental level, at the local regulatory level, private level within companies and nonprofit organizations. There's really a remarkable lack of standards that have emerged. I think Daniel's journal is my hat is off to Daniel and his journal, because they're trying to get some kind of consensus going, or at least the discussion going, so there can be a consensus. And I advise you all, really, one really important thing is to talk to colleagues. I mean, I remember years ago I was talking to Aryeh about what he was getting into this privacy realm, and his comment was, there's no law firms that know anything about this. And I remember that, like, does your law firm do this? And at the time, and I said, no, does anyone do this? And the answer is pretty much no. So we're all sort of learning as we go, and people like Aryeh are amazing resources because he's been there since the early days of this issue. So really, whether you're in-house or at a firm or in some other realm where you deal with this issue, you need to sort of find colleagues within and outside your organization. Get together informally, get together formally. Daniel's a great guy. Get to know him and get to know his journal, because we're going to need to figure this out. It's going to be the mess is going to get much, much bigger before it gets better, right?
I'm just the editor of the journal. There's actually like 40 other folks that are all involved, and it's a peer review committee. And we actually have the DOD. They now participate in the peer review.
Anything bad comes to Daniel, but
Yeah, everything bad. Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Using a laptop computer wireless as insecure as the mobile phone. It seems like you're saying the mobile phone is really susceptible to data breach. But if you order it in hierarchy, is wireless better, and then is
This is like a technology. So this is like a church and state. No, I'm kidding. The principle is it's what's on the laptop. How is your mobile device configured? I certainly encourage people to use mobile devices. I just encourage them to do it smartly. Like have antivirus, at least at an enterprise level, on your mobile devices. Have some sort of limited controls. If you're a larger organization, you have an MDM, make sure that you have these controls. Most organizations today, if they give their employees laptops, encrypt the laptop hard drive they put in, there's some sort of firewall antivirus program that's sitting probably at the server and maybe also at the client. There's additional levels of security and authorization, authentication that are happening at a mobile laptop, right? Because a phone, when you want to identify somebody, right? If you have the Android, some people hold I don't know if you see, they hold the phone to their face and it unlocks it. Other people put their pinky on it, or their thumb, or their big toe, or whatever they feel like that day. Or some people put in digits in their phone or draw shapes on their phone, but that's the level really of authentication you're getting on a mobile phone versus on a laptop. Maybe you have login passwords and then you have a two-factor authentication where you have a chip that they, depending on how you've designed it. So it's a little more, it can be equally insecure, right? It could be, here's a laptop, go to town. And so, it's really, it's just about how your organizational operates and what makes sense for both the culture and the business.
Yeah, I actually think the laptop is better than the mobile device for a couple of reasons. One is, in this day, every laptop is encrypted. A lot of mobile devices. are not. When you log on to your laptop, you'll get that notice that it's the company's business subject. It's all for business purposes, subject to corporate policies. For example, acceptable use policies. You don't see that popping up on your mobile phone. And what if somebody uses for BYOD, a dual use device, personal business, and takes a screen picture that's inappropriate? That wouldn't be on a computer. But at least hopefully the policy and procedures in place is still the case with mobile devices. So I actually find the ability to circumvent corporate policies, corporate controls that we have is easier to be done on the cell phone that's owned. Really, it's provided by the telephone companies. It's an independent product, and then the computers that are provided by the company. Having said that, computers are changing too. I mean, we use PCs. The new generation of 20 and 30-year-olds, they don't want anything but a Mac. And so they bring in their own Mac, and so then you have the same issues, and then same issues of controls that you would have with PCs. I would also, in terms of I do compliance as well as privacy, in terms of internal investigations,
that's the word.
And trying to investigate when there's an allegation of improper conduct. We have pretty sophisticated devices, and we have all the right consents and procedures in place for laptop computers. Less so for mobile phones and mobile devices.
That's a great point. And as a privacy officer, I think that everybody here would love to hear your viewpoint. But I mean, it's a lot more complicated when you have a mobile device and you're in China or France or any of these countries versus a laptop and conducting that internal investigation. Forget the theft, forget that, just to running not a run-of-the-mill investigation like you investigate all the time, but conducting that sort of investigation. What sort of privacy issues do you see?
So many. Just complying with local law, especially in Europe, and the European privacy model makes life very difficult. In Asia now, we are having stricter controls. Singapore is an example of rules. And again, the laws are changing on us. So you have a policy in place today, but Malaysia just finally signed its law into effect November 14th. Every couple of weeks there's a new law with a whole new set of processes and procedures you need to have in place. And you need to be aware of that, because that mobile device goes everywhere. And so wherever it is, it's going to be subjecting to stronger or weaker laws depending on what jurisdiction you're coming into. And some companies have a clean device rule, which is when you're traveling to certain countries, you're not allowed to bring your computer. Or device. You must bring a company device which is clean. It has nothing on it. And that's what you use when you're traveling overseas. That's probably the better practice.
And it's the best practice for certain countries. I mean, because literally you'll go through customs and they'll scan your laptop. So, I mean, it's just the best, it's the smarter practice.
Well, aren't there some, I mean, this is more your area, the area that you two deal with, but some countries will actually take your data, right? I mean, there's some sovereign countries that
won't take it, they'll scan it. It might, make a copy. I mean, I mean, and even in Argentina, right, you think, I don't know, I occasionally am down there for some stuff. In Argentina's privacy laws, when you want to run an investigation, are a nightmare. I mean, a nightmare. And you think, oh, Argentina, what's she going to do, right? She just appointed her new ministers yesterday. But believe it or not, like at the employee level and dealing with those issues on an internal investigation in Argentina with the mobile device is a big, big hassle because of the way that privacy is perceived for the mobile device there. And you can, if you want to.
I think that says it all, though.
Where maybe the Daniel and Aryeh, you have some suggestions if people here want to learn more. It's kind of a scary new world. Are there some good organizations and some good information sources they can go to? What should people do next when they want to figure out what to do?
Well, I mentioned Larry Poneman, who does these studies, and certainly in terms of knowing what's going on out there and where the risks are, that's important to know. Law firms issue
great alerts.
Yeah, great. Littler, they're not my law firm, so I can get back, but they have a wonderful publication that they've had on BYOD. If you just Google BYOD, there's some really good resources. You just need to find the right resources, but it helps you. But at the end of the day, what you do has to be customized to your business. And so how you're going to, if you're a big business, small business, what your risks are. So I personally recommend that if you're thinking about, in any event, you should be doing risk assessments. That is understanding how devices are used in your company, what data is being put on those devices. It's a very good exercise to do that. And then, as somebody was saying, if you think of all the risks, you'll never sleep. And I'm only 20 years old, and I just got the white hair from being a chief privacy officer. So you have to assess your risks, and I think most governments will give you credit if you have properly evaluated your risks and taken reasonable measures based on your company's risks. So you need to do, there's certain basic things you need to follow through, like getting employee consents when they join the company or when they start using the device, because afterwards it's too late. So there are processes and procedures in place, but you try and at least evaluate where your highest risk data is, your highest risk employees, and at least put processes and procedures in place to control that.
And another really compelling activity is just asset management. You can just simply make it so that you can turn off their phone if they haven't registered it with you. So at least then you know what people's mobile devices are. That's usually just, a maybe smaller step in the right direction. I think reading your insurance policy is always an advisable idea, both for data breaches, for lost devices, and the other things. I think asking your insurance carrier what they would suggest. A lot of insurance carriers today will gladly send you, inundate you with recommended policies and checklists and best practices. IEPP is another good resource. For encryption and standards, the State Department. For export encryption, if you're actually worried about those issues.
Daniel, you have to share your tip about Googling the links, because we were prepping for this panel, and he has a great simple suggestion for security.
So I believe in a lot more comments. You can buy security monitoring link traffic watching software. The other simple way to do it is just, rather than clicking on the link right away, you can copy the link and put it into Google and hit search, and usually someone will have reported if it's a malicious link. What often happens is that, as crazy as this may sound to people in this room, that you might be traveling, or your son or your daughter, or your niece or your nephew, somebody you care about is traveling in a country. They are literally there at the time, they're in that city, and you get an email saying, hey, I'm lost, I don't have a phone, I was robbed, please, I need you to send money, right? But, most people aren't thinking, wow, these people know that I have this person, they're in the country, they're in this city at this time, it's a lot of information, and they click on the link. And I promise you, if you ever get that, nobody that gets robbed is sending you a link to wire them money from Western Union. But at the time when you get the email, you're not exactly thinking, I'm going to say, oh yeah, of course they're asking to wire me money from Western Union, because that's what I would do. And so, and people and everybody in this room sitting here thinking, I wouldn't click on that link. But when it's someone you love and someone you care about, and you get that email, your perspective changes. So a simple way to figure out if the link is good or not is you can right-click on it, say copy link, open up Google, there's a little search box, you just paste it right in, and you hit search, and it'll usually, a large percentage of the time, tell you this is a fraud, a scam, not true.
Right, and if you get it from a friend or colleague,
it doesn't matter. It comes from a friend.
Please tell them. Please tell them that they've been hacked, so they can.
If you get it from a friend or colleague, let me give you a newsflash. That means their address book has been compromised in some way, shape, or form. Right? I mean, they just so you understand, right? If you're getting this email from a colleague or a friend, it means somehow, somewhere along the way, they might have not logged out of their Gmail account, right? While they were at the Intercontinental Hotel in Texas. Forgot to log out, somebody notices that, they download their address book, and there you go.
It also applies when we're talking social media. I mean, URL shorteners are a huge thing. The little biddies that you see, those URL shorteners, that's a new thing. Because, for years it was always, okay, I see this URL, that looks strange, I don't think I'm going to click on it. But now it's a shortened URL.
They all look strange, right?
And they all look strange. So even if it's valid or not, it looks strange. So yeah, just be wary of that, because you could do that. So great advice there.
I mean,
That's just too easy nowadays.
I mean, it's relative to how badly they want your information, right? Would you worry about a 15-year-old knowing how to crack your phone? Probably not. But it's some kid that, well, actually you might, because you go on Google and say, how do I crack the phone? And it'll give you about 50 different ways to do it, or even more. So, I mean, I personally wouldn't do it, but it's certainly a 4-digit password that's not 1, 2, 3, 4 is a lot better than no password.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a matter of effort and degree, right? I mean, if they lose it and you're in a cab and it's sitting there and you can read the people's email or whatever, that's one situation versus the other. But I think a password's better than nothing.
And I think as a matter of our policy, if an employee loses their cell phone, even if they recover it, they have to report it. So at least we have a window of vulnerability, so we know when the cell phone was lost and when it was not, so at least you have some protection on that. The other thing is to create an environment, safe environment in the company where if somebody has clicked on a URL, and that could be on their computer or on their cell phone, and there's a possibility it could have been infected. People are very embarrassed when they do that, but they should still be encouraged to report it and have somebody check the computer. If people generally they click on it and it doesn't work, and so they say, well, nothing happened.
It worked.
It worked. And so you need to encourage employees. That's a cultural issue to encourage them to.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in creating a culture where, better that you report it in 24 to 40 hours that you lost the phone than waiting a week while you're going around looking or sweating bullets. And, I'm a big believer in actually creating that culture where people feel at least the ability to tell you, because without you knowing as a company, it's very hard to manage any of that risk, really, because you don't want to assume everybody's losing stuff all the time.
A quick plug for the Find My iPhone app. I lost this phone on the beach this summer. I went through 3 nights of sometimes rain and was buried in the sand. Turned out that a teenage daughter of a neighbor of ours was doing gymnastics and stepped on it. Several days later, it was out of juice. She plugged it in, and I got a text message saying, someone has found your iPhone. And I literally walked down the street until I got to the house where it was, and there it was.
Your password is too weak.
Something like Dropbox, when you download it on your iPhone, that seems particularly dangerous.
I mean, it depends how your phone is configured and how you're using Dropbox. But just remember, the Dropbox data isn't sitting on your phone, it's also sitting on the Dropbox servers. And if you forget to log out of Dropbox and they're at a business, you'd be surprised the number of people that are in a rush, they're trying to get to their morning meeting, they're traveling, they go to the business center to print up whatever document they got. They log in, and let's say they use Dropbox because their client sends them the files to their Dropbox, and they forget to log out. So what do you think happens if you forget to log out of Dropbox for the first hour or so? Nothing.
And then I'm not going to pick on Dropbox particularly, but just remember that whenever you have a third party that holds your data,
it's awesome.
They can get subpoenas. Lawyers are smart enough to figure that out, that there's another source of data out there. So
yeah, if you're litigating, the best source of information is and you see a Dropbox invitation, is to subpoena the Dropbox account. Because even if Dropbox deletes it, it still keeps it for 30 days in the user's account itself. It's pretty useful.
And that's something to take consideration as well, is that it's more than just BYOD, it's the BYOD and applications, right? That's something to consider as well, that there's applications that people can bring in, like you're saying, Dropbox.
Or like the Starbucks app. It's pretty awesome. People they have the Starbucks locator and they get coupons sent to them and payment or whatever. Well, if I want to know if you were at your break or when you say you were in a meeting and I'm saying no you weren't, or let's say it's Medicare and it's a physician and a doctor, hypothetical investigation, right? Well, why do I got to get your phone? I just subpoena Starbucks and boom, I know where you were.
And that goes again to mobile versus computers. Peer-to-peer software put on mobile devices, that still can be done, and that has its own risks. Most computer systems, that's locked out. Corporate computer systems, at least, that's locked out.
But it's also good for tracking employees. We have some employers that actually want to know when their employees are speeding. So their manager gets a text message anytime they go above a certain speed limit. Interesting. So, I mean, it goes both ways. It does have value.
So it looks like we're out of time. Thanks to everyone on the panel. Great information. I hope you all enjoyed it very much.